The grand ballroom of Hertfordshire House shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, each flame flickering against gilded mirrors to cast the assembled guests in a light both flattering and merciless. The season's finest gowns rustled like the soft susurrus of summer leaves, and the men, immaculate in their tailcoats, spoke in tones measured and precise, their laughter punctuated by the delicate clink of champagne glasses. Outside, the night pressed and cold and unyielding, rain streaking the windows like tears on porcelain. Inside, the warmth was almost stifling, heavy with perfume, wax, and the unspoken judgments of society. She stood at the edge of the dance floor, a picture of careful composure, though her hands were slight and trembling, the fingers white as ivory from restraint. Her gown, a muted sapphire trimmed with lace of exquisite fineness, clung to her figure without ostentation, yet the society matron next to her whispered with venom barely disguised as concern. "Do be careful, my dear. You have the temperament, but not the experience." The girl inclined her head politely, though her lips pressed into a line that betrayed neither humility nor fear, only awareness. It was her first proper assembly of the season, and her heart threatened to betray her composure with every fluttering glance, every shuffle of silk and satin on the polished floorboards. She had been advised, chastised even, by her elder sister, whose voice had dripped with a mixture of affection and warning. Do not let him play with your heart, for the Duke is not a man to be trifled with, and London is merciless. The caution had lodged in her chest, a cold weight, yet it did little to stem the sudden, inexplicable fluttering that swept through her at the mere sight of him. Across the room, leaning with casual command against the carved banister of the grand staircase, stood the Duke of Blackmore, a man whose reputation was whispered with awe and caution, whose presence seemed to bend the very air around him into lines of authority and intrigue. His gaze swept the room with measured detachment until it lingered, inevitably, inexorably, on her. There was a spark of curiosity, yes, but something subtler still, a recognition, as though he glimpsed beneath her careful exterior and saw the tremors of a mind both alert and unyielding. For a moment, time seemed to narrow, the music dimming into background murmurs, the gossiping voices of the ton fading into irrelevance. And then it happened. The music swelled, and she stepped forward to accept a dance from a gentleman of standing, a courteous young lord whose hands were firm, though polite, upon hers. For a heartbeat, she moved with the poise of her upbringing, her head held high, her eyes cast modestly downward. But a misstep, a hesitation born of nerves rather than inexperience, sent her ankle brushing against the hem of her own gown, a subtle stumble that drew a collective gasp. Eyes widened. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like a disturbed pond, and the delicate lattice of social expectation began to tremble. Her sister's whisper sliced through the din, sharp and urgent. Do not falter. Do not give him reason. But it was too late. The room had noticed. A few stifled chuckles, barely audible but fatal in their cruelty, drifted to her ears. She raised her chin, forcing a smile, her cheeks burning with a heat she could not quell. Pride wrestled with shame, and for an instant it seemed the humiliation would swallow her entirely. And then, quietly, with a precision that defied the chaos of the moment, the Duke stepped forward. His eyes, dark and unflinching, met hers, and the weight of his gaze was both a challenge and a protection. He did not speak, did not gesture, yet the room seemed to shift imperceptibly in response to him. The whispered laughter faltered. The eyes that had gleamed with judgment now glanced away. It was a silent acknowledgment, a promise written in the space between them, that he had seen her stumble and had chosen to look beyond it. The sensation, though subtle, was revolutionary, a life defined by constraint, by the ever-watchful eyes of London society, suddenly met with something untouchable, something daring. The music swelled again, and the dance resumed, but she moved with a new awareness. Each step became a question, each turn a subtle test of courage. And all the while, across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, the Duke remained, his gaze unwavering, a solitary sentinel of attention in a sea of judgment. As the assembly continued, whispers rose and fell, scandal blooming like frost on the windows. And yet, despite the humiliation, despite the careful scrutiny, she felt it, a spark, a quiet and dangerous hope, that this man, this enigmatic figure whose reputation was as formidable as it was feared, might see not the misstep, but the strength beneath it. By the time the candles guttered in shadows stretched across the parquet floor, the unspoken tension had settled like a promise in the air. London would talk. Society would judge. But for her, at that moment, nothing mattered more than the steady, unwavering attention of the Duke, who had, quite deliberately, closed his eyes to the scandal and opened them instead to her. And so the seed was sown. A single glance in a crowded ballroom, a misstep, a whisper, and a silent, magnetic acknowledgement, a beginning wrapped in shame and intrigue. What would follow, none could yet know, but the stage was set. And for her, the world had never felt so dangerously alive. The days that followed the Hertfordshire Assembly were a slow-burning fever in the corridors of London society. The heroine found herself moving through drawing rooms and whispered parlors with a new awareness of every glance, every measured phrase. It was as if the city itself had shifted its gaze, leaning closer to observe her, to weigh her worth, and to catalog her missteps. Letters arrived with meticulous timeliness, some perfumed and cordial, others laced with curiosity, thinly veiled as concern, each one a reminder that her minor stumble had been noted, catalogued, and, in some circles, exaggerated. Yet among the whispers, a singular gesture arrived that unsettled her more profoundly than any scandal could. One gray morning, a servant delivered a slender, silver-wrapped package. It sealed the unmistakable mark of the Duke of Blackmore. Her hands shook as she broke it open, revealing a bouquet of winter roses, their petals flushed with the faintest hint of crimson, wrapped delicately in violet silk. They were perfect, impossible in their fragile elegance, and in their silent presence lay a declaration she could neither ignore nor fully comprehend. She pressed the blooms to her cheek, inhaling the sharp sweetness, feeling the brush of his attention in the quiet of her drawing room. London, however, is never so accommodating to delicate intimacies. Rumors began to stir like restless leaves in the wind. The gift was the spark, the bouquet a prelude to gossip. Whispers claimed the Duke had chosen her for amusement, that a lady of her modest standing could never withstand the weight of his scrutiny without faltering. Invitations, once polite, became tests of propriety. Questions were posed in the guise of civility, yet carried the knife of suspicion. She smiled, nodded, and endured with a poise that belied the racing of her heart. Still, beneath each embroidered sleeve and polished glove, attention coiled tight, a mixture of fear and longing that no society matron could ever perceive. Even her sister, guardian of both reputation and caution, watched with a mixture of unease and reluctant admiration. "Do not allow him to see more than propriety," she whispered one afternoon as they arranged lace and ribbons in the sunlight that spilled through the tall windows. Yet even she could not quell the subtle, unspoken truth. The Duke's attentions were no mere gesture of civility. They carried weight, intention, and an audacious disregard for society's immediate judgment. The heroine felt it in the subtle touches of the lettered card left beside her place at a salon luncheon, in the faint scent of his cologne upon the handkerchief slipped into her bag, in the occasional shadow that passed her carriage as it rolled through the misted streets. Each token was both a gift and a challenge, a question wrapped in courtesy. Do you see me as I see you? Are you willing to risk the eyes that watch? And London, always poised to magnify every hint of impropriety, began to hum with murmurs. At a particularly crowded soiree, a noblewoman leaned so close that her lace sleeve brushed the heroine's, her voice a silk-wrapped dagger. "I hear the Duke favors you more than the tongue believes prudent." One must wonder how long such attention can be sustained without complication. The heroine's cheeks warmed, not from shame alone, but from the dizzying awareness of power. Both hers and his, intertwined in a game she had not asked to play, yet could not refuse. Yet it was in the quiet moments, removed from the polished glances and clipped voices, that the truth of their connection revealed itself. During a carriage ride through rain-slicked streets, the Duke sat opposite her, his presence a formidable gravity, and spoke not with the formality of the ballroom, but with an intimacy that startled her. "I observe, always, not merely the manners or the missteps, but the manner in which you endure them, the courage you summon. That is not lost on me." Her pulse stuttered. No gift, no bouquet, no whispered rumor had delivered this clarity. In those words, she felt both the thrill of being seen and the danger of exposure. Every choice, every gesture, now bore weight beyond her own desires. Society's gaze had sharpened, but the Duke's recognition had added a layer of impossible intimacy. By the end of the season, the whispering streets and the polished floors of society had begun to pulse with a singular question. Would the girl who had stumbled in her first dance rise to the challenge posed by the Duke's deliberate attention? Each bouquet, each subtle glance, each rumor served as both temptation and trial, threading a tension between shame and longing that neither London's gossip nor her sister's caution could untangle. And through it all, the Duke's presence lingered like a shadow that refused to vanish. He did not speak openly of desire, did not extend overt promises, yet every token, every measured gesture, carried an undeniable weight. In the quiet of candlelit rooms, with the winter roses pressed against her hand, she understood that her heart and her reputation had become part of a game whose rules were unwritten, whose stakes were her own fragile dignity. By nightfall, as gas lamps flickered against the damp streets and the city exhaled in mist and fog, the heroine closed her eyes for a brief instant, imagining his gaze upon her. London could whisper, society could judge, and her sister could warn, but one truth remained undeniable. The Duke had chosen to see her, deliberately and fully, and in that choice lay both peril and the first fragile promise of passion. The game had begun, and neither of them could yet predict who would emerge unscathed or transformed. The Duke's library was a sanctuary from the relentless scrutiny of London, a room-lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes whose spines gleamed with the careful polish of a lifetime. The air carried the faint scent of aged parchment and tobacco, mingling with the subtle fragrance of the heroine's gown, now dimmed to a quiet violet in the soft glow of the firelight. Rain pattered against the tall windows, each drop a staccato drumbeat on the glass, a gentle accompaniment to the tense silence that stretched between them. She had arrived under the pretense of consultation on a charitable project, yet every step across the parquet floor carried the weight of anticipation and unspoken questions. He rose as she entered, bowing with the precision expected of a station, yet his eyes lingered, dark and inscrutable, a quiet summons that left no room for pretense. He gestured to a pair of chairs near the hearth, the firelight catching the angles of his face, casting shadows that softened the strict lines of command into something approachable, almost vulnerable. For several moments, neither spoke, and the heroine felt the thrum of her own pulse, a rhythm that seemed to demand acknowledgement. The Duke finally broke the quiet, his voice low and measured, each word deliberate. "You have endured much in these past weeks." Whispers, scrutiny, the ever-watchful eyes of a city that delights in cataloging missteps. And yet, you do not falter entirely. That, in itself, is remarkable. Her cheeks warmed, both from the truth of his observation and the unaccustomed intimacy it implied. She inclined her head, struggling for the propriety demanded of her, yet finding it difficult to mask the trembling beneath her composed exterior. "I have learned," she replied softly, "that endurance is no longer enough. One must also understand the eyes that watch, and what they hope, or fear, to see." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the arms of the chair, his gaze unwavering. "And what do they hope to see in you?" The question was not idle. It carried the weight of genuine curiosity, the kind that pierces beyond decorum and expectation. She hesitated, her fingers twisting the lace at her wrist, the smallest gesture betraying the turbulence within. "They hope," she murmured, "for elegance, for perfection, for a flaw to exploit." Her voice faltered, a rare fracture in her carefully maintained poise. "And yet," she added, lifting her eyes to meet his, "I find that in your presence, I wish to be seen differently. Not merely the image, but the thought, the impulse, the fear, even the longing." The Duke's expression softened, a subtle shift in muscles that bespoke both surprise and a quiet satisfaction. He regarded her not as society might, with its detached scrutiny, but with attention so full it bordered on reverence. "You presume much," he said, though the edge of a smile tugged at his lips. "That I might see you, truly, is no small matter. And yet, it is precisely what I cannot resist." A hush fell over the room, the crackle of the fire the only witness to the sudden, undeniable intimacy between them. She felt the weight of her own desire, long suppressed beneath layers of propriety and caution, rise in tandem with an equally palpable recognition in him. There was a gravity in this exchange that neither gesture nor gift could convey, a turning point where observation became confession, and admiration transformed into something far more precarious and potent. For a moment, the world beyond the library ceased to exist. No London gossip, no societal expectation, no sisterly warning. Only the two of them, a man and a woman, standing at the edge of propriety, daring to acknowledge the stirrings of their own hearts. The heroine's breath caught as he spoke again, quieter this time, almost a whisper. "I have never closed my eyes to such a storm before. And yet, I do not look away from you." Her hand, previously resting in her lap, rose almost instinctively, hovering in the space between them. Neither moved closer, yet the air between them seemed charged, as though the very room had recognized the significance of this admission. It was a confession not of love, not yet, but of recognition, of understanding, and of the perilous allure that comes for being truly seen. As she rose to take her leave, the firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that merged and separated in the quiet tension of the room. He inclined his head, his voice steady, yet carrying a resonance that lingered long after she had stepped into the damp London streets. "The world may watch, and the world may whisper, but here, now, you are known. And I shall not soon forget it." The rain greeted her outside, cool against her cheeks, yet it could not wash away the awareness that something fundamental had shifted. The connection forged in the library, quiet and deliberate, had altered the stakes. The Duke's attention was no longer a token, no longer a game of society's design. It had become a reckoning, intimate and unavoidable. And as the carriage rolled through the misted streets, the heroine pressed her gloved hands together and allowed herself a fleeting acknowledgment of hope, tinged with fear. The rules of propriety might govern London, but in that private confession, the heart had begun to speak its own language, one that neither scandal nor caution could contain. The grand mass ball at Blackmore House was a spectacle of gilded opulence, a dazzling pageant that drew the entirety of London's season into a single, glittering hall. Candlelight flickered across painted ceilings, bounced from polished marble floors, and caught the glint of gemstones upon necks and wrists. Music rose and fell, a tide of strings and woodwinds, carrying whispers and secrets through the crowded room. The heroine entered, her gown of midnight blue a deliberate contrast to the gold and silver that surrounded her, a statement both subtle and defiant. She held her head high, though beneath the mask, her pulse raced with anticipation. Every step across the polished floor was a measured declaration of self-possession. The Duke awaited near the orchestra, his own mask concealing nothing of the intensity in his eyes. He watched her approach, not as the society would, skeptical, critical, detached, but with a quiet certainty that unsettled the whispers of the ton. Their gazes met, and in that instant, a chord struck. The distance of weeks, the tension of gossip and scandal, collapsed into a single, electric understanding. A scandalous murmur rose as the noble women noticed his attentions, subtle yet unmistakable. Some pressed forward with polite interrogations, their voices carefully crafted daggers. "I trust you will not allow the Duke's favor to cloud your judgment." Others offered more discreet glances, weighing the propriety of a lady so conspicuously noted by a man of his stature. The heroine's lips curved into a faint, deliberate smile. She did not speak, did not defend herself, for her eyes, steady and unwavering, spoke with a clarity words could not. The Duke stepped forward, his presence parting the sea of onlookers like a blade. "I will not allow whispers to dictate the worth of what I observe," he declared, his voice ringing with measured authority, carrying over the music and the murmurs. Heads turned, a few gasps rose, muted by the audacity of his public affirmation. This lady's character is her own, unshaped by opinion, unshadowed by rumor. And I will not abide otherwise. The room shifted, the tension palpable, as society adjusted to the fact that the Duke's favor was no casual indulgence, but a deliberate act of acknowledgement. Some stiffened, scandalized. Others leaned in, intrigued. The heroine, though aware of the eyes upon her, felt only the steady warmth of his attention, the conviction of his choice. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a measure of triumph, tempered by the quiet fire of gratitude and longing that burned beneath restraint. He offered his hand then, an invitation wrapped in ceremony and intent. Her fingers brushed against his, a touch so light it might have gone unnoticed, yet electric in its significance. "Shall we?" he asked, the words a simple query that carried the weight of decision, desire, and mutual recognition. She nodded, allowing herself to be led into the dance, the music rising to meet them, as if acknowledging the culmination of every whispered warning, every stolen glance, every tension-filled moment of their acquaintance. Step by step, turn by turn, the dance became a declaration not merely of attraction, but of defiance against the scrutiny that had shadowed her. Each movement was a testament to courage, to dignity maintained under observation, to a connection now undeniable. They moved with the grace of those who understand not only the art of the ballroom, but the subtler art of communication, the language of eyes, hands, and the slightest inclination of the head. And when the music softened, drawing the dance to its close, the Duke leaned close, his breath a warm whisper against the mask. "You have endured their gaze, borne their judgment, and yet remain luminous. Know this, I have never admired a spirit such as yours, not for its elegance alone, but for its courage." Her heart caught a tumultuous rhythm of pride, relief, and something deeper, rawer. "In you," she murmured, scarcely believing the quiet audacity of her own voice. "Do you endure it for me, or for your own fascination?" He met her gaze with unflinching intensity. "For you, and for no other reason than that you are worthy of being seen, truly seen, without compromise. That alone commands my attention, my defense, and, if you permit it, my devotion." The murmur of society fell away for her in that instant, replaced by the singular truth of his declaration. A hush of recognition swept across the massed crowd. Eyes widened, whispers paused, and the unspoken stakes, the peril, the scandal, the judgment, were rendered secondary to the undeniable magnetism of the moment. She allowed herself the faintest, irrepressible smile. It was a smile of victory tempered by caution, of hope entwined with a lingering awareness of propriety, of love poised delicately upon the edge of society's expectation. The Duke's hand remained in hers, not possessively, but as a deliberate anchor amid the tempest of glances and gossip. The dance ended, but their proximity did not. His gaze held hers, unwavering, and in that charged silence, a promise lingered, unspoken but indelible, that the trials of society and the whispers of London could no longer dictate the course of hearts determined to acknowledge one another. And as the candles guttered and shadows deepened across the gilded floors, the heroine understood, fully and irrevocably, that the public declaration of his choice had altered everything. Scandal could rise, rumors could persist. Yet in that ballroom, under the unyielding attention of the Duke of Blackmore, she had been seen, defended, and chosen. The tension, once a gnawing uncertainty, had transformed into an electric certainty. They were bound, for better or worse, by recognition, courage, and the first fragile articulation of a passion neither would deny. London could watch, society could whisper, and the season could pass. Yet in that decisive, incandescent moment, their story, daring, scandalous, and achingly human, had begun in earnest. Dawn broke over Blackmore House with a pale, trembling light, the mist curling across the manicured gardens like whispers of a secret yet untold. The world outside remained unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding within the walls of the estate. In the stillness of the early hour, the heroine moved along the polished corridors, her footsteps measured, her heart braced against the storm of emotion she had kept restrained for weeks. Every glance in the mirror, every adjustment of her gown, was a preparation for what could no longer be postponed. A confrontation not with society, but with the truth that had long simmered between herself and the Duke. He awaited her in the library, the same room where confession had first bridged the chasm between propriety and desire. The fire flickered low, casting golden shadow across his features, softening the usual severity into something almost human. He rose as she entered, not with ceremony, but with quiet expectation, the kind that holds the power to disarm a person in ways words cannot. "You have come," he said simply, though the weight of the statement pressed against the room with the gravity of a verdict. There was no question, no invitation, only acknowledgement of the inevitability that had been building since the first misstep at Hertfordshire House. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching, though her pulse leapt at the proximity of his presence. "I had to," she murmured. "I can no longer navigate half-truths or whispered intentions. Every look, every token, every cautionary word from my sister, it has led to this." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then let us dispense with artifice," he said. "The world has observed us enough. Let us be candid in what is ours to claim." Her breath caught, a tremor betraying the precise composure she had cultivated through countless assemblies and salons. "And what is ours?" she asked, though the answer had always existed between them, written in glances, in touches, in silences brimming with unspoken longing. He stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the crisp air of the room, and for the first time, no mask, no metaphor separated them. "You entirely," he said. "Not a fragment, not the shadow society permits. You, with all your courage, all your grace, all your fear and defiance, and I will have no part of anything less." The heroine felt the tension that had defined weeks of stolen gestures and concealed glances break in a surge of relief and exhilaration. She moved forward, bridging the final space, and allowed herself the unguarded truth she had kept beneath layers of decorum. "And I choose you. Though the eyes of London may linger, though whispers may follow, I choose the man who sees me as I am, without compromise, without shame." The Duke extended his hand then, not ceremoniously, but as a promise, deliberate and irrevocable. She took it, and the touch was no longer tentative. It was a declaration. The weight of months, the scandal, the judgment, the relentless scrutiny fell away, leaving only clarity, intimacy, and the quiet thunder of hearts aligning. Outside, the mist began to lift, the first golden tendrils of sunlight piercing through the fog to illuminate the gardens. In the hush of early morning, sisterly caution gave way to silent acknowledgement. The heroine's sister, having observed from the threshold, offered a nod of rare approval, the unspoken understanding that some truths of the heart surpass propriety and fear. The Duke drew her closer, his forehead resting against hers, and in the soft gravity of the moment, the past missteps, the bouquets, the whispered warnings, all were rendered inconsequential. What remained was a bond forged in courage, recognition, and a love neither of them could deny. "We begin anew," he murmured, his voice low and certain. "And whatever storms may follow, they shall find us steadfast." She smiled, a trembling, luminous smile, feeling the final release of tension and the thrilling certainty of choice. "Together, then," she said, her words carrying the weight of both triumph and surrender. The world outside continued in its relentless rhythm, but within the quiet grandeur of Blackmore House, two hearts had resolved the delicate calculus of fear, desire, and societal expectation. They stood together, hands entwined, eyes locked, each breath a testament to the victories won over shame, rumor, and the cautious boundaries of propriety. As sunlight spilled fully into the room, painting the Duke's features in warmth, she realized that nothing in London, no judgment nor whispered scandal, could diminish the truth they had claimed in this shared, irrevocable moment. And for the first time, fully and unreservedly, the heroine allowed herself to imagine a future where love, courage, and recognition reigned over the rigid rules of society, where the Duke had closed his eyes to everything but her, and in doing so, had opened a world entirely theirs.